remember at the age, well, I don't remember, I have a story in our family at the age of, I think I was 3.5. And we were down in Cornwall with the family and my older cousins. And Mum and Dad weren't Christians, no hint of Christianity apart from their child in our family story at that point. And my older cousins decided to walk out around the rocks to the next bay, and Mum and Dad thought I was safe because I was with the older cousins, and the older cousins thought I was safe because I was with Mum and Dad, and I was somewhere in the void in between. Those of us that are parents can get with that, especially last week on the beach at Porthcawl. And I followed my older cousins a couple of metres behind them out and round, and they went round and the water came up to them, but I was only 3.5, so the water came up to about here. And I got into difficulty, and the next thing my mum and dad know is this fisherman that happened to be on this beach is bringing this wet little 3-year-old up the beach and saying, "Is this your son? I've just fished him out of the water." And he gave him back to mum and dad, like, oh, you know, first of all killed the older cousins, and then they gave him back, and then they never saw this man again. He just went, and that was it, you know. And I remember mum and dad going. They said they went back to the tent that we were camping in, and that night they thanked God that I was safe. And mum now, as she says, I'm not sure that wasn't even an angel that turned up and rescued that day. But God was involved in our family's story before we had any understanding really of who he was or any relationship of who he was. And I want to say God has been in your story since the day you were born and before you were born, before the beginning of time. I like this great story in Acts 17. If you've got your Bibles, turn there. I have actually put the Bible verses on there, so you can follow me. But the projector's a bit low, I think. You should be able to see it. Don't worry. So Acts 17. So Paul goes to Athens. So Athens is a place full of sin and full of, you know, it was just a messed up place to be. And Paul goes to Athens. And we're just going to read through a bit of that story this morning. Bear with me on the hard words, and if I say them wrong, feel free to interrupt with the correct pronunciation. A group of Epicureans and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? I quite like that, actually. It kind of gives me, if Paul can get called a babbler, I'm okay. I'm okay, I'm doing all right. What is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Paul walked into this den of sin, this den of like anti-Christianity, like what any kind of faith kind of thing went on. There are massive amounts of God. Paul walks into this environment, and I'm impressed and inspired by the fact that he doesn't start by pointing out their problems. He doesn't walk in and say, you guys are going to rot and go to hell and burn for eternity. He doesn't say that. He starts to engage with the fact that here's a group of people that have some spirituality about them, some sensitivity, but they're connecting with the wrong thing. There's something in their story that is spiritual and has faith, but it's connecting with the wrong thing, and he doesn't condemn them. You know, he doesn't walk in and give them some, latest theology that he's read in a Christian bookshop that spins every mind and we're like, oh, what's going on? He just goes with a simple truth of who Jesus is. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate the message and the story of Jesus so people can't find him in their own lives because we've made it too complicated, and it's simple. Verse 19, then he took him and brought him to a meeting of the the asparagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. We need to... I put my last sentence above it, so that's not the Bible. So he starts to tell them the simple truth about what Jesus did. The simple truth. And they're blown away by it. They think this is the biggest revelation they've heard in their entire kind of spiritual journey. Like, wow, this is amazing. Paul's probably thinking this is quite simple. But I think what we forget sometimes as Christians when we tell our story, because we believe, we find it easier to believe again. If I said to you, well, if someone came to me when I was a young Christian, or before I even went to New Zealand, one day, Mike, God's going to pay for flights for all your family to fly back from New Zealand all the way back to England and all the way back again. And you're going to be at Bible college and you're going to have no money. And that's going to be about $12,000. That's about £6,000. Don't worry, God will provide that. I'd be like, yeah, whatever. Whatever. But because I went on a journey of faith and I believed, I had my faith grew and I was able to believe for something bigger. And I think sometimes we walk into non-Christian environments, and because we've had faith for a long time, we come in with too big an idea that they can't grasp. Well, we really just need to come in with some simple truths. Something simple that they can believe that there's a God that always loves you. That's a massive truth in itself. But sometimes we overcomplicate them and tell them these great, these great profound stories, and we need to take people on a journey. I like the journey that me and Rich have been going on with finances. If I said to Rich, I said, Rich, I want this building. I want it for as cheap as possible. He said, how much money you've got? I said, I've got no money. He was like, you're nuts. I was like, yeah, I'm officially nuts. That's I've seen a psychiatrist once. And we went on this journey, and Rich was like, okay, we now got the building, and it costs us like £300 a month. We sit down on Friday and we're talking and we're looking at a budget to get the whole building, and it's going to cost us £2,500 a month. Rich is able to handle that because we started with the 250. I don't know, maybe there would have been a grace for me to jump, but because me and Rich have been on a journey and we've seen and we've bounced off each other's faith, it's grown, and he's able to grasp it. I think sometimes with people we need to go on a journey and just point out the little bits of God in their story, and it grows and grows and grows, and then suddenly you've got someone with a massive amount of faith that's saying, come on Mike, we can pray for £2,500 a month. And I said, well, I'm the pastor. Shut up. But I've seen someone's faith grow over a short period of journey as we've gone on that journey together, and I keep pointing out God in the story. Do you get what I'm saying? All of the, next, verse 21. Verse 22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the asparagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are religious. For as I walk around looking carefully at the objects of worship, I even find an altar with an inscription to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not saved by humans' hands. If he needs anything, rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations. Then they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him. Though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have all our being. And as some of you, our own poets have said, we are his offspring. He brings the message of Jesus Christ into an environment and just blows it apart. He just comes in and he just says, I acknowledge the fact that you guys, he actually calls them religious. And if you go back to the original text, he's actually giving them a compliment to saying, hey, you guys, I'm complimenting you on the fact that you have a spirituality. Well done. Not, hey, you shouldn't be worshipping that God, or you shouldn't be worshipping that God. No, I applaud you for the fact that you're sensitive to the things of the Spirit, but let me send you in the right direction. Let me point you into the place where you should plant that faith and that intuitive, I can't say that word, that one. It doesn't come in, I remember, sometimes you see those people and they have the placards and they're like, you're going to go to hell, and they're trying to condemn people into Christianity and condemn people into the gospel. People know that they're full of sin. You don't really need to explain that to them. You bring the presence of God into someone's life, conviction comes. But what you need to do is you need to say, let me just realign where you're looking for faith, where you're looking for hope, where you're looking for peace. Let me move it. Maybe you're looking for hope and peace in that part of your story when it comes to money, but maybe you should put your trust in God. Maybe you're looking for this to fix this problem in your family, but maybe instead of looking for that, maybe you should just pray simply to God and ask him to sort it out. We had a lady come to Super Kids, and she came up to the coffee bar and she said, tell me about your faith, and I started to explain, and she said, well, my husband died 3 years ago in a car crash. And she said, I've been going to a spiritualist church, she said. Because when I get to the spiritualist church, they sit down and they're able to communicate with my dead husband. And I thought, that's just whack, That's just... my first reaction was to say, you're getting involved in something very, very demonic, run away. That was my gut feeling. But then this wisdom came over me and said, here's a woman with a sensitivity to spiritual things. All you need to do, Mike, is just realign that sensitivity to the one truth. And maybe you need to realign it and say, you don't need to live with the grief and the pain you have for a lost husband, and you can live in freedom when you believe in the God that I believe in. And I started to go on a conversation with her, not a condemning conversation, but to say, you understand spiritual things, I can tell that. You have a longing to find the spiritual answers to the things in your world. And I respect that. And, and I'm just a little bit worried about where you're putting that at the moment. And she's like, tell me. I was like, well, because you're putting it into things that aren't life-giving. And I said, I believe in a God that can give you freedom from your grief, that can bring peace in your darkest moment. And she's like, why? She didn't feel condemned, but she was given an opportunity to realign and to look and find God in the story ahead of her. She hasn't been back to Super Kids again since, but she said, she wants to come and help out. I was like, yeah, come and help out. And I'm hoping one day she'll walk through the back of through this building again, and I can say, come on a Sunday, you'll meet a group of people that have found peace in God. I didn't condemn her for the fact that she was focused on the wrong thing. I just pointed out that her story could have the right thing in it. Amen? Where are we up to? And he goes on to tell them about the story of this unknown God. And he says, the story behind this, if you go into Roman history, you'll find this story about the people in Athens had a massive plague hit Athens. And what they did is they got their spiritualists to go and worship all of their gods and tell them to take away this plague. None of them took it away. And then one of them said, well, there is a God that we don't know his name, but we've heard of him. And we're just going to build an altar, and we'll call it the unknown God. And we'll just worship this unknown God. And we'll hope that the one God that is meant to be, I think he's the God of the Jews, I'm not sure, but we'll worship this one thing. Because the rest of them didn't really work, and we'll try this one. So the guys in Athens, they worshipped this unknown God, and the plague disappeared. And they kept this altar. It's there. If you go do some research, it's there. And it's funny that God was even at work in a whole nation before they even knew who God was. And Paul just comes along and he just says, look, you know the unknown God? I want to tell you the name of him. Who in your world do you know where God just wants you to come in and point out God along their journey? You know that time that you got over cancer? That was a miracle, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, let me tell you, the unknown God has got a name. His name's God. Do you remember that time you had that car crash and everybody said you should be dead? Yeah, I was lucky. No, I wasn't lucky. Someone had their hand on your life. Do you remember, that Sunday school teacher when you were a little kid, and how you felt so alive when you went to Sunday school and you sang those hymns and it became alive in your world? Yeah, I do. Well, that was because you're connecting with the same God I was connecting with. And that God right there, right now, wants to connect with you again. Where are we? People, 99% of the people I've met in this world have a spirituality about them, but we Bible bash them instead of encouraging them to reconnect with the right thing. How much would the world change if we just came in and said, let me point out God in your story. God's been there since the day you were born, and he knew before eternity. He knew before time, and let me just point him out and show you everything. People often say to me, why is there a God if there's such bad things in this world? Why is there an earthquake in Nepal that kills so many people? If there's a God, why does that happen? Why do we always blame the negative in the world upon God? Why don't we go around claiming the positive on God? The fact that the sun comes up every morning. The fact that, that you get to have those tender moments with your kids and you give them a hug and you just feel that warmth. That's God in that. Those moments where you just felt complete despair and you wanted to finish it all, and you've gone out and you've seen a small sparrow sat on a fence and you thought, wow, that's God. if we could go around pointing out the God moments in people's lives and the fact that God is the one that brings all good to this world. Where are we? It says in the Bible that all living things and all the good things in this world are His. And we need to be beacons as Christians of pointing that out in people's lives. Of saying, come on, there's something good in your story, even though it seems so bleak. The fact that I'm turned up and taking you out for coffee, that's something good. You know, we had a guy, I met him at school, and he said, we started talking, and he says, I'm an atheist. I said, well, that's fine. I'm glad you believe in something. You believe there isn't a God, well, I believe there is. But anyway. And we ended up talking about roller hockey of all things. And he said, yeah, I run a roller hockey team. And he said, I got a junior team and you got nowhere to train. I said, well, I've got a big warehouse. They could roll around the warehouse. He said, could they? I said, yeah, no problem. He said, okay. So yesterday after football, he came and looked at the warehouse. And this is a guy who confesses to be an atheist. And he said, well, you know, how much is it going to cost? I said, look, we can't charge you rent, we're not allowed to. I know, let's just work out something that makes it work for you guys. He said, why would you do that? I said, well, because, you know, God's told us to make this building a blessing. He's like, wow. And we walked around and we did some more. And then we went in the coffee shop and he started talking and he said, oh, if you need a hand with anything around here, just give me a shout. I'll take a day off work and come and do some painting and cleaning for you. So, yeah, cool. And then he said, and then we were walking down the steps and he said, did you realise I was brought up Catholic? He said, God's been involved in my life for a while. I thought, there you are. You've walked into the house of God and suddenly you realise God's in your story. And we got to the bottom of the steps and I said, well, come to church. I said, he said, well, what kind of church are you? I said, well, the kind of church that eats raw chickens and kills rats. I did say, just so that way you up there. That's what the agent thinks we are. He said, can I come? I said, look, we've got to hide the dead animals. No. And we got to the bottom of the steps. He said, well, what kind of church are you? I said, well, we're a come as you are church. He said, we don't want to change you. We don't want to change you at all. He said, God will change you. But we're not going to change you. We just want to love you and walk and do life with you and point out God along the way. He said, wow. He said, no one ever in any kind of religious kind of Christian spirit has ever said that to me. I said, well, that's just who we are. We're a bunch of broken people that love Jesus. And there was this moment like, wow. And I could see suddenly God was becoming real in this guy's world. I hope they get to use the building. Because once a week we're going to have 20 mums and their kids roller skating around somewhere. Hopefully not killing each other. But 20 people in church. Huh? Well, he said the mums bring them. I don't know. The mums bring the kids. Yeah. Yeah, he will be, yeah. Where are we? Matthew 5 verse 43 says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. That's what we're to do. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. We're called to love our neighbours and to honour them. But let me tell you, God reigns on everybody. God loves on anybody. God's not saying, when it comes to God's love and God's provision for people, that's not conditional. People that made it, we're the people that made it conditional. We've said, God won't do it for you unless you do this. No, it says here, God will do it for you, whatever. Call on my name. I wonder whether whether we would be more successful in evangelism if we went in with more love and grace and less condemnation. If we just went in with a heart to say, let me show you God in your story. That was the verse I wanted. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He's always good. If you're here this morning, you know, let me tell you, God designed for you to be here. You know, you might have a story and you might say, yeah, but where is God in all of this? God is in it because God designed you to live in this moment. It says at the end of that chapter that it says that he He sent man to the earth. He sent the time that they were going to come, and he said where they were going to come. God, God has given us complete free will. I can do whatever I want, but God designed me to live right now in this moment. He designed me to live here in Rogerstone right now in this moment. His plan was for me to go to New Zealand and do all those things because he saw it before the beginning of time. If he saw it before the beginning of time, no matter how far God seems, I can find him in my story because he started the story and he will finish the story. I just need to focus. I remember, in some of my darkest moments I've had, I'm like, God, where are you? God, this is just messed up. This story doesn't make any sense. Thousands of miles away from home with a homesick wife and 3 young kids and a church full of nutters. And that's being nice to them. Your second sermon, someone tries to beat you up and it goes downhill from there, It's like, God, where are you in all of this story? Why is Helen homesick? I remember arguing with God, like, God, this is not right. We're all meant to be happy, clappy, and run around in circles going, kumbaya or something. But it's not. God, where are you in this story? Because this story looks like a horror movie to me at the moment. But I look back now and I say, God, you were there, you were there, you were there. And if I never went through that chapter of this book, I couldn't do this chapter of this book. People say to me now, is this hard? I'm like, no one's trying to kill me. Everybody's quite normal, to be honest. At the moment. I get told off when I get home. But I'm able to look back on that season and say that was hard, but you were in that story. And I thank you because that part of my story means I can stand here with strength, with capacity to say, yeah, we're going to fill that warehouse with broken people. And I can do it because God's made me strong enough to do it. Together we're going to change the whole of this nation. I can stand here and proclaim with such confidence that God is on my side and God's going to come through for me if I hadn't gone through that chapter. If I hadn't gone through that stuff, I'd be like, I'm not too sure. Or maybe. But I can stand and I can talk to other people that are in desperate places and say, I know where you're at because I've been there. I've been there, and let me tell you, you might not feel like God's there, but He is there. You just need to get out with the dog and go for a quiet walk and look at creation. I'll tell you, He's written all over it. Find a friend that you can have coffee with and get them to speak life into you, because that's God speaking life into you. Let me tell you, if you're here this morning, you're here for a reason, and you're here because God has wanted to write something on the book of your life. Jeremiah 1:5 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nation. God's saying, I knew you before you were born. I knew you at the beginning of creation, and I timed you to be here. You're not in this room just because you're filling up a seat because Pastor Mike wants to feel good that he's got people sat on his seats. You're here because God wants you to hear, because there's something amazing that He wants you to be involved in. And let me tell you, we're not a church that's going to turn around and say, yeah, you need to get everything in line before you can join it. We're a church that says, just come in, put your hand up, get involved. We'll go on a journey. I heard this story about a fish. And this fish, right, got asked, what is water? He said, I don't know what water is. So he swam and he swam and he swam and he still couldn't. He went and said to Mr. Starfish, what's water? He said, I don't know. Went and saw Mr. Whale and said, Mr. Whale, what's water? He said, I don't know. He swam and he swam and he jumped out onto the beach and he started to suffocate and think, flip my neck, this ain't very good. I'm becoming a dried kipper on the beach. And he looked back and he saw this big amount of blue stuff. He said, that's water. I need to jump back in there. Sometimes we can be surrounded by the presence of God. We can be surrounded by every provision, but we're not able to notice it. And we need to switch a switch in our brain to say, God, you're here. So for some of us, that's a faith statement to say, God, I know you're here. I'm surrounded by you. We don't worship a God that's in an altar, in a temple. We worship a God who's everywhere, who's the creator of the universe. And life might be hard for you right now, but maybe you need to say, God, help me switch that switch and find you. Let me call out on your name and let me see that you're here. What's the time?